Hey everyone, Mirai here, and welcome to this sixth video in this Pro System video series. This is a bonus video. The original series only had 5 videos in it, but I did go overboard when doing the remake of the previous video, the 5th review and demonstration video. I did go overboard with that profile. I implemented a handful of systems and whatnot that I teased but didn't show off, and I figured that if I'm going to be sharing the profile, I'm going to need to show those off and talk about them. Now, I know that in the previous video, disclaimer here, in the previous video, I may have hyped this one up a little bit. It's still going to be exciting, but it is going to be quite bland because we're just going to be looking at mapped keys and key maps and all the actions in there, and we're just going to be tracing along on how some of these systems are set up. And fair warning, some of them are set up, they're kind of jerry-rigged. They could be set up a lot better. But I was running out of time here as the expansion closes in. I was running out of time, so I was just like, okay, you know what? We're just going to implement these systems as they are. They're kind of bare bones, rough around the edges, and we'll fix them later if we want to. Or we'll leave it up to you guys to fix it if you want to. So what do we have here? What do we have here? Right, I do have these menu buttons here. That's right. These menu buttons are new. These menu buttons are new. We have to do this in a certain order because this spec menu right here, this Spec-Swap menu, everything kind of ties into this. So when I originally did the series, the 5th video, the review and demonstration of the original series, also contained this Spec-Swap menu. I did it a little bit differently back then, and when I reviewed that profile from back then, I was like, we can do this different. We can do this different. I can do this more efficiently. So when I set that up, that's when I decided that, you know what, we can do a spec check. We can check the spec that they are assigned at the moment. And then, you know what, we can do dynamic switching on ATGs. We can do dynamic, what else do we have here? Dynamic menu buttons right here as per spec assignment. So yeah, things got a little out of control based upon this Spec-Swap menu. So we'll start here first. But I guess maybe what I should throw out immediately here that I didn't mention in the previous video, and I'm kind of mad that I didn't, is simply that when I whipped this menu out, this Spec-Swap menu, and I went to go change specs and everything, I didn't talk about the normal way to do it, right? Because that's not the normal. You don't have to build in Spec-Swap menus and all that mumbo jumbo in order to swap specs around and virtualization and all that. What you would do on a normal basis is just go to the character, right? And then just change what they're assigned to here. For the virtual combat, for the healing, you would change that, and then you would come over here to the action target groups, and you would change their assignments here as well, and then you would export. But the fancy, quick way to do it in-game is obviously through a Spec-Swap menu. Now, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but this doesn't feed back into ISBoxer, right? So if I change him to Retribution now, he's protection. If I change him back to Retribution, if I change him over to Retribution, this doesn't change in ISBoxer. This doesn't feed back to ISBoxer. ISBoxer doesn't change these settings. So what that means is that this is a temporary change in the game. And I think I actually mentioned this now that I say this. I think I actually mentioned it in the 3rd video where I show the mapped key virtualization and whatnot, that it's just temporary, that when you re-export from ISBoxer, that whatever is assigned here is what's going to be reassigned when you export. So just to clear all that up in case there's any confusion. Now, as for this spec menu, and before we get started on that, there's, a handful of things in here, and like toggles and swaps, I added a bunch of stuff. You can look at how I create the click bars. You can look at how I create the healing grid, this stuff right here, how I do this. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I just change the color, and I make several steps actually it's down here. Just several steps with a bunch of, actions to handle all of the click bars and change their colors a different shade through every step. So nothing too crazy. I've got a custom video effects layout that I have a video on my channel that explains how to create a custom video effects layout. That's not the one that's used through the wizard. It is a fully custom handmade video effects layout. And of course, with the slot swaps, we do a slot swap extra, which is several macros for World of Warcraft. So I change the camera following style. I ensure that click to move is definitely forced off in windows that shouldn't have it on, which is the main window. And then I do a macro to change graphics from high to low. There's also a video on my channel that shows how to do that as well. So really, there's a lot of stuff. We'll be talking about mapped key step actions as well. There's a video on my channel that covers that, even though it's for ISBoxer 41. Everything is exactly the same in ISBoxer 42. 42 didn't change that much, I promise you. You know, a lot of people look at the 41 videos, they're like, is this still relevant? Well, the answer is most likely yes, unless it's like a quick setup wizard or something, which is what changed in 42. Anyway, time to look at the spec swap menu action here. So where does this begin? So it begins right here. And again, just to point out before we get, I'm not going to keep bouncing up to the characters, right? You just have to know that I pointed this out in the previous video. I'll point it out again, that the spec menu is being virtualized to that class, right? So the paladin is assigned, all paladins will be assigned to the paladin specialization. The shamans will be assigned to shaman specialization. This will never change. The only reason I did this is that so I could keep paladin specific settings in a paladin key map for the paladins, right? To keep that character identity that I hammered home in that very first video. So I'm not going to keep bouncing back to the characters. Just understand that we're actually going to be using the shaman as a prime example here because she's a good example for ATG swapping. Speaking of ATG swapping, geez, we can never get to this. I have a special key map here that I know that I was going to do a lot of ATG swapping. And rather than create target group actions in every single map's key as I do this along the way, I felt that I should just make a master key map with all the map keys inside of it. So, for example, you know, I talked about this in the previous video. I've got three columns of click bars here for healing, healing 3, healing 2, healing 1. Those are all set up to do something different. So if someone's going to join healing 1, they're not going to be in healing 2 or healing 3. So we swap them out. So join healing 1, leave healing 2, leave healing 3. Likewise with healing 3, we're going to leave healing 1, we're going to leave healing 2, we're going to join healing 3, right? Or we can leave healing altogether if we swap to a spec that doesn't do any healing. For melee, you're either melee or ranged. You can't be both. So if you jump into the melee action target group, you're leaving the ranged action target group. And you flip-flop when you join ranged, you leave melee, right? So I set all this stuff up. You can look through all this. It's just a master key map so that I can always, similar to setting like the action bar layout is another type of master key map that you're always going back and, you know, working with. So I did that with an action target group setup as well. And you could probably do that with plenty of other things as well, just for whatever system you may be working on. So with all of that said, let's look at the spec menu now. So when I hit Control-Alt-S, we fire this off. And it's a two-step process. First of all, it's gonna feed right back into itself. It's either gonna do spec menu load or spec menu unload. And these are the two that get virtualized. So here we can see just real fast, spec menu, we're already in spec menu. We're gonna do spec menu load on step 1, right? Because obviously we can toggle it. You gotta have a way to toggle it on or off, right? So you gotta have 2 steps here. Now, we're just gonna do load. So we do load and we're gonna run spec menu virtualized. Knowing that it's virtualized to the class, as I just showed, every class is assigned to their own thing. And we're going to use the shaman as an example here. So the shaman is assigned to the shaman specialization. So in here, we're running spec menu load. When we run spec menu load, we load the shaman spec menu, which is, well, I guess I need to be on the shaman, it's helpful, which is this set of 3 buttons right here. We load that, I guess I can move this over a little bit. We load that on window current, of course, because it's the shaman. We're just loading it on the shaman, any shaman in the party currently. So we can look at this menu. This is shaman spec menu, and we got a handful of menus in here. Shaman spec menu. It's assigned to the shaman spec button set. There's 3 buttons here, right? So it's assigned to a button set, shaman spec button set. And here we've got 3 buttons that do something different. So we've got the elemental button, we've got the enhancement, we've got the restoration button. I guess we do have to pull this out a little bit. And here we can see that I do have these images assigned. One thing I should probably say right now is that sharing this profile, and you may have already noticed this if you looked at it in the previous video description, I will have stripped the images out of the profile and I will put text in these places instead. Sharing images is possible. It's possible for me to zip up the images and you can unzip it into interspaces file somewhere, folder somewhere, and then you can reuse the images. Ultimately, rather than just like beat around the bush with a bunch of excuses, I'm just kind of selfish. I made these buttons for myself, right? These are World of Warcraft buttons. I pulled them out of the game files. I did a bunch of work on them. I've got a highlight. I've got a press. I've got the press button as well. I don't want you to do anything, so go back to that. Okay. So I've got the, I've got the stuff set up. They're my buttons. I created them. I just want to keep them for myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize that I'm a selfish bastard, but you're not getting the pictures. You're not getting the images. I'm sorry. So with that said, if we were to click on restoration, so we swapped between all these specs. It doesn't matter which one we choose, but we'll pick restoration. So there's 2 actions below this. Any menu button can do the same amount of, they can do the same actions as you can in a mapped key. So just keep that in mind. So you can either set this up in a mapped key and make sort of a master mapped key, or you can just do the actions here. It's not either way. Doesn't really matter for this setup. Nothing limiting that I can think of. So we do another do mapped key action. Well, first of all, we do a pop-up text. Just optional, not really necessary, but it is nice to just see pop-up text on the screen from time to time. So anyway, we do a do map. This is a do mapped key action. We're going back to the spec menu. We're going back to the original spec menu. We're feeding right back into the spec menu, and we're doing spec 3. So for people who play World of Warcraft, if you look at your spec, if you bring up your talent pane, you have Elemental, Enhancement, Restoration. It's in that order. Elemental, Enhancement, Restoration. It is always in that order. It's always alphabetical. It's always alphabetical. Top is always number 1, then number 2, then number 3. It's always that way. You can run a macro, run/set specialization. We'll see it in a moment. Anyway, we'll see it in a moment. But that's just how that's set up. So we do spec 3 in the spec menu at this point when we click this button. So if we come back to the spec menu, we're going to run spec 3. What does spec 3 do? Well, first of all, I guess we're going to do another do mapped key action. And this is virtualized to spec 3 in the Shaman specialization key map. But in addition to that, we do a set specialization. That's what it is. Run set specialization 3. So that's what does the in-game macro to change her talent spec over, right? But we're coming back now down to the Shaman specialization. And there's a bit of extra looping here. Like I didn't have to have all this. I think I could have consolidated this a bit better, but I did this simply because I wanted to categorize all of the spec stuff in one spec key map. So that's why I did this. I think ultimately I could have probably run this straight from combat hotkeys. And that's what I did in the previous video as well, but I had to maintain more mapped keys that way. So anyway, we're coming back down to Shaman specialization. Spec 3, we're doing SO3. What does she do? She does a bunch of stuff. We're not worried about, we're not worried about this first action. This first action and this last action have to do with these menu buttons. We're not worried about those right now. We will get around to talking about that. So ignore those for right now. So here we go. We're swapping some action target groups around. We're joining the healing 3 ATG, which means we're leaving 1 and 2. So right now, she's obviously the off-spec DPS healer, the off-heal DPS character, right? She's in healing 2. If I move over to retribution, why did I say retribution? If I move over to restoration, she's no longer in that ATG anymore. She's no longer part of this middle column. She's now part of this column, but I have to take her out of this, otherwise she's going to heal as well. So now, when she's done swapping, now she becomes the healer in the 3rd column because she swapped ATGs. And that's where that's happening right here. We're swapping and she goes from melee to range. So enhancement, it doesn't matter whether she goes from elemental, which is ranged, to restoration, which is ranged. You don't break anything by telling her to stay in the ranged ATG. But you have to make sure that that's there simply because you may be coming from an enhancement spec, which is melee. So you have to make sure that you're switching from melee to ranged. And then of course, here's the mapped key virtualization, as I showed in the 3rd video. Here's the same stuff, right? We're changing the virtual combat key map to be the restoration key map. And of course, because we have a healing virtualization setup, we're changing healing virtualized to be shaman restoration as well. So now she's just assigned to her shaman DPS rotations, which is nothing, but she's also assigned to the 300 group of the 3rd column of healing is probably the easiest way to say that. So there's that, and then she's got dedicated healing as well. So that's how the spec swap menu works, right? It's very simple, right? It's very straightforward. Very straightforward. There's this macro up here that I did want to show. I stored these all in a separate World of Warcraft settings macro section where I do some set view stuff. I do some camera following styles. I've got the graphics high, graphics low that I set. Run specializations, here they are. Run, set specialization 1, 2, 3, and 4. Of course, Druid has 4 specs, clear target, and then some static pop-up button 1 and button 2 stuff. So that's to accept. Just when there's a dialogue on the screen where there's a yes or no or an accept or a cancel, that's what these do. These are generic, and this ties into the menu buttons that I use. So as for the spec check, right? So now she's resto. It checks right. The check is good, and that's very similar to this as well. You can just trace this along. Look, I get that this is probably somewhat convoluted. It's bland to just talk about this and look at this. You'll be looking at this yourself, but when you're looking at this, if it's confusing, just write it down. Just draw it out. You might have one giant long list of, connection from mapped key to mapped key to mapped key to action to action to action. So what? Just draw it out and it'll help you understand it better, right? And that's what I do sometimes. Sometimes I have to draw things out. I'm like, all right, how do I want to connect this, right? When things get convoluted and complicated, you need to make a labyrinth of mapped keys in order to do a bunch of checks and balances to make sure things are in place and they're working and they work from other windows and whatnot. I mean, otherwise your systems kind of fall apart if they don't work from every window, assuming you want them to work from every window. But so we'll just look at this real fast as well. The spec menu. So spec assignment check. We do run this in the combat hotkeys key map. So the class key maps themselves, we do run this. So we virtualize this and we do spec assignment check. And of course, if we look at Shaman, we do spec assignment check. This is the one that we probably could have ran straight from combat hotkeys. But this is the one I wanted to keep categorized in the spec key map. Not a big deal, no matter what key map it's in, as long as you can execute it somehow, right? So this does feed back into virtual combat. So spec assignment check from virtual combat. We all know that virtual combat is being assigned to the class key map. Now we're restoration. So in restoration, we have this thing called spec assignment check. And this is where she runs a menu template. This is kind of cool. I thought I was going to have to create a bunch of different menus to do this, but I realized that I could load a menu and then I could change the menu. So here, once again, I load my class spec feedback menu, which is nothing but a blank menu. There's nothing special in it. And here's where I actually set the properties of the menu. And of course, it's window current from the Shaman, so it's on the Shaman, right? The Shaman is setting the main image to be Shaman Restoration, which is, of course, the cool whatever this is. Roots, whatever that is. I don't know what that icon is. So that's what that is. And of course, same, if we just leave that up, we can look at, say, the priest. Priest is now shadow. So if we were to run it, we did run it, and we can look at spec assignment check. She does the same thing right here. She loads the generic menu with nothing special in it, and here's where we set the properties of the menu. You can click right here. This is how we set the properties of the menu. You first have to load it, then you set the properties. It all happens instant. That's a bad snap. It all happens instantaneously like that because it's just 2 quick actions. And here she's setting the priest shadow icon. And that's how that's done. Now, let's talk about these these menu buttons here. So give me just a moment. So I guess first maybe I should, before we start looking at this, I should just show off what they do. So this is something I talked about in particular for the, kind of far away here. That's kind of loud. I talked about this on the Paladin, in the previous video, about how I wanted to be able to toggle consecrate into his rotation. So right now, is it toggled on? I actually don't remember. Let me just make sure I've got this set. No, where are you, Paladin man? Okay, so it's set off, right? So this is off, but you can see that there's a consecrate icon here. So if I target this, this is the main consecrate icon, right? This is the actual spell icon from the action bar, from the spell itself. And of course, I just took that from the game and I turned it black and white. I grayscaled it, and if we turn it on, it lights up. So we can turn it off, and we'll do this, and he won't do his consecrate. I talked about how having consecrate on manual so I can lay it down whatever I want, right? But of course, if I'm playing from another window, I want to be able to toggle this on. So now, when I go through his rotation, he will lay down consecrate. Just like that. And that's very fancy, right? That's very fancy. And that was the point. I actually wanted to expand upon that. I wanted to expand upon that system and make it and give it a few different states. Give it that automatic, just throw it into the DPS mix and see when it lands. I wanted to do that method. I wanted to do a hotkey method from other windows, and I wanted to do a completely off method. So I didn't get around to doing that. Like I said, expansion was closing in on me. So I wanted to just get this out as fast as I could. For the mage here, I did show in the previous video, I did show that she can do a blizzard, ground target blizzard spell. Well, since then, I have spec'd into Ring of Frost, which is another ground target AoE spell. So now Shift T, actually, I don't want to be on her window. So now Shift T is going to look the same, right? It's the same setup and everything, except it is Ring of Frost now instead. That's not Blizzard. So what I did was, if you've got multiple ground target spells, you can either, see, this is where the menu buttons come into play. You can either set up another hotkey that you're going to have to remember for Blizzard in addition to Ring of Frost, or you can set up a button you can click, and then you could do that, and she'll cast the Blizzard. How nice. How very nice, right? But of course, if there is a cooldown on a spell that, this doesn't, ISBoxer can't read the game, so you can't create like an awesome cooldown thing. You can try to create something that's sort of accurate. It'll give you an idea on when a spell is probably off cooldown, but there's no way for this to actually know when the spell is really off cooldown. So that's especially true if you're trying to set this up for like procs. If you think that you're going to catch like a proc or something, there's no way for ISBoxer to know that your spell has proc. There's just, it has no access to that information. That would be against the rules of the game. So the fancy thing here, though, about the shaman. So when we first did this, she's enhancement. She's got 2 buttons, right? She just had a third button a moment ago. Where'd that third button go? So first of all, what do these buttons do? Well, this is heroism / bloodlust. I do have like an oh shit button or a big DPS button that I like to use on bosses and whatnot. Or maybe just a dangerous pull. I want to use my cooldowns. But the cooldowns generally have about a 1 minute, 90-second cooldown, somewhere in there, 60 to 90 seconds. I don't always want to be blowing heroism on just trash packs, right? I don't want to do that. So I separate heroism into a button I can click. And she'll use heroism, just like that. And bloodlust for horde, of course. This is her reincarnate spell. So if I actually kill her. Is this good? Probably. So she can release spirit, she can reincarnate, or you can check why she died. So from any window, if I turn my key maps back on, I can click this, and she pops back up because she reincarnates. Now that's just a generic, it's a very generic, that was the click, static 1, pop-up button 2, or something like that. It was a very generic attempt at just getting her back up. That may actually fail if there's multiple dialogue options on the window, on her window. It may actually fail. So it's unlikely that it's going to fail, but it may fail. So anyway, those are her 2 buttons for enhancement. Now, when she moves to restoration, she gets a third button. But she also keeps the other 2 because she can still reincarnate and she can still cast heroism. Right? So I don't want those buttons to go away, but I do want to add this other one. This is what I call totem breakout. So we click this, and there's 3 little totems that break out. These are little totem icons that she uses. And of course, they're available in any window. So I can click this, and this is a healing totem, is healing stream totem. I can click this one. This is lightning surge. It's again another cursor-based video effects. Drop the totem down. That's going to explode and stun enemies in the surrounding area. And then of course we've got a spirit link totem. This is a defensive cooldown, a defensive totem, which will doesn't matter what it does. It's a helpful totem, right? So that's very cool. And I can click it again, and they'll go away. It's a little totem breakout thing. So this is where things get a little complex and a little bland and boring, because we're going to be tracing a lot of this. This was a system that I was really struggling with on how to, even when you shut them off, they come back in the proper state, right? Even if I have this off, these go away. They don't come back, though. They don't come back. When I have the little totem breakout, I do want to hide that. That's my own personal preference. You could leave those out, though, if you wanted to. You'd set it up a little different. So where do I even want to begin with this? I guess, let's see. So I guess one thing I didn't hit on here, and I probably should have hit on this right away, was this initialization key map. This is, yeah, I should have hit on this right away. This is going to be a little off to the side here. So when I run that key map when I launch the character set, and if you set something here, just so you know, you can also set this on the character level. So if you click on a character, you can also on the general tab, you can click, you can assign whatever you want when this character is launched. Both of those options, character or character set level, they don't fire off unless you launch the entire character set. I believe the final slot has to launch. If not, the entire character set has to launch. I was running into some problems and I was bothering Lax, and I was like, Lax, why is this not working? I have this set here. And he's like, oh, it's because it fires off. He's like, do you have a partial set running? I was like, yes, I have a partial set running. He's like, that's why. So if you do start with these perform them mapped key when character set is loaded or reloaded, you will want to load the entire character set if you're testing this. Just a heads up. Now, what I do here is with this startup sequence in the initialization key map. So we'll come down here to this initialization key map. This is going to do two things. It's going to load those menu buttons, but we'll get to that in just a second because I did talk about dynamic ATG swapping. So first we're going to talk about this do initialize in the virtual combat key map. So virtual combat goes to the combat hotkeys or the class key maps in this case. So if we assign her to enhancement, which she is assigned to in ISBoxer right now, we swapped her to resto in game, but she's still assigned to enhancement. If I was to export now, she would run the initialize mapped key in her class key map. And here she would loop back into the spec, right? So again, elemental spec 1, enhancement spec 2, restoration spec 3. She's running spec 2 because this is the enhancement spec. We would go into, spec 2 right here, and she would run all of this stuff. So upon export, she is making sure that she's in the correct healing ATG, the correct melee or ranged ATG, and whatever other ATGs she needs to be in. So someone like the Paladin's Protection, when I export from ISBoxer, because he's virtualized to be protection in ISBoxer, he will run the initialize here, which then does spec 2 in his specialization key map. Spec 2 is he's joining healing 1, which is the first column of click bars, healing click bars. He's going to join the melee group. Retribution also joins the melee group, but of course, Holy would be a healing spec, and therefore I would want to keep Holy in the back, so Holy would be set as ranged. He joins the interrupt ATG. He joins the stun ATG as well. That is something that the Holy Paladin would be leaving because being ranged, their interrupts are only melee ranged. And their interrupt and their stun is only melee ranged. So I would take the Holy Paladin. I guess we could just show this. Or here, that's spec 1. We take the Holy Paladin out of melee. We put him in ranged. We do interrupt leave. We do stun leave. So it's a lot of swapping. Here's the problem I was running into. It's not really a problem, but it's like when you come to the character and you come over to the virtual map keys tab, you go ahead and you change this. Like if I want to go Holy, I'll change it to Holy. I'll hit OK. I'll come over here. I'll change this to Holy. I'll hit OK. Then you need to come over to the action target groups and you need to make these changes. So I would go from healing 1 to healing 3. I would make that change. I would go from melee to ranged. I would take him out of stun. I would take him out of interrupt. I kept forgetting to do this. And after I set up the spec swap menu, I was thinking, there's got to be a way that I can just fire that off whenever I export from ISBoxer so that I no longer have to remember every time to change these. Now, I don't want to screw this up because he is what he is. Actually, it doesn't really matter because he is set this way no matter what. Yes, looks good. So in that case, I don't actually need to assign him to the things that he's going to be dynamically changing between. So there's a little less assignment here that you might notice on some of these characters, but it's simply because their actual assignments are being assigned on the virtualization, on the initialization of launching the character set itself. So there's that. Now, on for these menu buttons. You can go ahead and trace the rest of this initialize through if you want to all the specs and see what they do. And some of them might be wrong. Like, I don't know all the druid specs and which interrupts they have and which stuns they have and stuff like that. I'm not entirely sure on all that. So some of the stuff may be wrong. You may be like looking at this and thinking, God, Mariah, you've got this wrong. So it's okay. I may have messed something up somewhere along the way. Again, this was kind of hurried at the end. Anyway, we're doing buttons. We're doing the buttons mapped key in the virtual combat key map. Virtual combat is the class key map now. So shaman, we'll just start enhancement here. Enhancement, because she's only got 2 buttons, right? So we run buttons. We run the buttons map key. We run step 1. It's a 2-step dealio. It's not a 2-step process, but I need a way to be able to load the buttons and unload them, which you'll see in a moment. This is where shit gets complicated, okay? This is where I'm going to lose a lot of people, but it really helps. This is where writing things down and drawing out the full breakdown of it. So, for example, I mean, if you look at the healing video in this series, I do that as well. I try to do the exploded view, right? I do that twice in that video, in the healing video, where I just show all the different sets and all the different stages where everything's, and I put a bunch of colored lines and boxes around all the place so you can kind of trace what's happening along the way. And that's, you don't have to get that intricate when you do this. You can just draw it crudely on a piece of paper, but it helps to do that, to understand how an in-depth system can work. So anyway, we're loading Shaman 1 and Shaman 2. These are the 2 menu buttons we're loading. Great, and that's what these 2 buttons are here when we go, you're right, come back here. When we go to enhancement, right? These are the 2 buttons. Everybody's asleep. Okay. These are the 2 buttons we're loading, Shaman 1 and Shaman 2. When we move to Resto, we load that 3rd button, right? And of course, if you look at restoration on the buttons, we're loading 3 buttons this time. We're loading 3 buttons. Now, how does this work, though, right? How does this work? Because it happens upon initialization. And if I change specs, if I change virtualization in ISBoxer and I re-export, or if I change it via my Spec-Swap menu here, then the buttons will dynamically change as they should. Oh boy, this is where things got a little complex, and this is where the system gets kind of dirty, right? Kind of dirty, can probably be set up a lot better, but I just set it up this way and it worked, and I just rolled with it. So it is what it is. Homework project for everyone. If you want to implement this, implement it in a potentially better way. So we saw this happen when we changed specs. So let's just look at this. First of all, for enhancement, we disable the class menus. We run this particular mapped key in toggles and swap. We'll look at that in a moment. We run that particular mapped key. Then we do the buttons again. The idea was that for a spec like the Paladin here, for a class like the Paladin, if he goes to Retribution, he no longer has the Consecrate spell. There's no reason for me to now have this Consecrate button here. So if we switch to Ret, it goes away. If we switch back to Prot, it comes back, right? That's what I wanted. So that's why we first have to hide them. Because we first hide them just in case the next spec we're switching to has no buttons. That's what we have. That's the first check we have in place, right? So we rerun the buttons, and then that reassigns things because the virtualization just happened here, and then we rerun buttons down here. This particular action is going to all with current. Everything up to this point is pretty much window current. This is all with current because we are displaying the buttons. We want to display the buttons on all of the windows. Unless, of course, you have buttons that you don't want to display on all of the windows, then you would change this target here. However, we need to go see what we're doing here in the disable class menu buttons. Toggles and swaps. Here we go. Disable class menu buttons. Now, this is where it's a little retarded. It's a little ridiculous. So we had 2 steps, remember? On the buttons mapped key, in the class key map, there were 2 steps. First step, loaded stuff. Second step, unloaded stuff. Here, when we run this step, we use a mapped key step action. And we set everyone who has buttons. Unfortunately, the mage, I forgot to set the mage up here. And I noticed this before. So this is a good example that I forgot to set the mage up. Because when she moves to Arcane spec, she can't use Blizzard, I don't think, anymore, right? I don't think she can use Blizzard in Arcane spec. So she wouldn't need that Blizzard button here anymore. It would be unnecessary. So anyway, all the specs that the shaman can be, and the shaman will have buttons in, she needs to run these. First of all, we set everything to step 2. Step 2 was the unload. Step 1 was the load. Step 2 was the unload in the class key map. We set this to the unload step. We also toggle this totem breakout because we need to keep it in sync. This is another step action, mapped key step action. Finally, at the bottom here, we run the button's mapped key again, but we've already set everything to step 2 right here. We rerun it, which means we're now running step 2. Okay? And that's how this works. We clear the buttons, we reload the buttons. We clear the buttons, we reload the buttons. That's the way we do that. And of course, it's also built into the toggle, the key map toggle. Now, this was tricky. That's why this system is set up like this, because technically speaking, you could just use a menu state action, and you could just remove all menus, because these are menu buttons. These are not click bars. You could just remove all menus. However, there's this menu up in the upper left here, this toggle menu for key maps and broadcasting. And I wanted to keep that there simply because at some point I do want to implement this menu button system, this dynamically swapping menu button system into my own personal profile, which is ridiculous. But I want to implement this. This is a new system, right? I've got over 8 years under my belt in ISBoxer. And here I am, I'm coming up with new shit. And I love it. This is what gets me excited, man. This is what gets me excited, is building this stuff in ISBoxer. It's no longer about multiboxing in the game. It's about playing the game that is ISBoxer and trying to figure out how to build all these systems and whatnot. So anyway, in my own personal profile, which you may have seen at times, you can go back and watch some old Multiboxing with Mirai stuff, and you can see some of the setup videos in there. I've got special menus in the upper left of my windows that can do different things. They actually reflect the state of key maps, whether I'm in vehicle combat, whether I'm in combat toggle, whether I'm in just normal mode, and all this other advanced stuff, right? I need to keep that on the screen. I need to keep that. I don't want to toggle that off and on. I want to keep that always on the screen. So I'm thinking, okay, how can we keep that one menu on the screen, but then hide the other stuff? Well, this is how you do it. And again, it's a little dirty, but it still works. It still works. So there's that. Okay. I think we've talked about everything I wanted to talk about here. Spec-Swap menu system, spec check, menu buttons. I think that's it. So I think now we're going to jump into a dungeon. We're going to jump into a dungeon. I'm going to show off some crowd control. We'll look at how that's set up, and that'll be the end of the video. I swear to God, this thing's going to be longer than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Anyway, let me jump into the dungeon, and I will see you all there. Okay, so something I almost forgot about. We're just going to show off crowd control, but of course, there's the dedicated healing that I imagine some people are waiting to hear about. This isn't really anything complex. It's just a concept that I hadn't touched on in the first 4 videos of the Pro System, and I didn't want to cause any confusion in the previous review and demonstration. It's something I've somewhat adopted in recent times here now, probably within the last year, maybe 2 years or so, something like that, somewhere in that timeline. You know, when you think of dedicated healing, to me, that originally was where people would say, like, assign healing to something like a number pad, and each button on a number pad would heal another member of the party, and you'd have some other stuff set up, right? And that's not really, to me, that's not really my own personal playstyle. That doesn't really work well for me. And that's where click healing came in and pretty much took over the whole multiboxing scene. It was all the rage. However, in very hectic situations, as people are finding out with click healing, it's somewhat difficult to be watching the DPS, be watching the melee DPS if you got them, watching the range to make sure they're not standing in anything, making sure that the tank has got aggro and everything, making sure people aren't dying, and here you are, now you're playing whack-a-mole on people's health over here. If you're leading from the healer, it's probably a lot easier to do that. But if you're not leading from the healer, it becomes a bit more difficult then. So that's where I adopted dedicated healing. And I've since turned it into part of just the virtualized healing setup. So what this is it's very similar to what's in combat hockey, the concept of combat hotkeys, right? So in combat hotkeys, you pretty much just have your combat stuff in there. but there's hotkeys in there, and it's virtualized, and it leads somewhere. It leads to the class key map. Well, that's the exact same concept here for dedicated healing. The click bars, the 3 sections of click bars, they don't have any hotkeys because you're clicking on the click bars or using your mouse wheel on the click bars to execute the heals. Okay, well, these are direct heals that are directly for the tank, and I need a way to execute them. So I give them hotkeys, and it's all tied to my mouse. Again, this is the mouse that I use. It's a Mad Catz MMO7. They don't make it anymore, unfortunately. So hopefully my several that I've acquired last forever. But it's very helpful. I've got a thumb wheel on there that goes left and right. It's not the same as like a scroll wheel, but it is just it's just like a key press to the left or a key press to the right. You can spin it. And then, of course, I've got some dedicated cleansing and dispelling here. So if we just look at this real fast, we've just got, I don't know why I expanded these, but they're virtualized in the same way, right? They lead to the healing virtualization. And of course, then that's all virtualized at the character level. That takes us to the class key map. So right now, the priest is the dedicated healer. So we look at priest, holy priest, and here we go. We've got this particular set in here, just like she's got the third column click bars in here, and she's got her other DPS stuff, which she doesn't do DPS stuff. But it's just there in case I need it, right? And if we spin the thumb wheel to the right, we do flash heal on the tank. Now, this is, of course, a macro that is stored in ISBoxer. It doesn't have to be stored in ISBoxer. It can be stored in-game. If you're playing a game that isn't World of Warcraft, then it pretty much has to be stored in-game. But it is dedicated healing for the tank. And not all of these are filled in. In fact, most of them probably aren't filled in. But they all do something, right? So if I come over here, and you can see my mouse is over here, and I can just spin my thumb wheel, and she'll heal the paladin. She'll throw a hot on the paladin. She'll throw a big heal on the paladin, just like that. She's got, there's some other buttons in here. This is actually very similar, ties into what I was saying in the previous video. Somewhere in Utgard Keep Run, in that dungeon run, I stopped and I was talking about human brain bandwidth and the issues you have when you set up too much stuff. You set up too much stuff in a short period of time and you forget half of it. You have to work on your muscle memory, right? So my muscle memory, I know that thumb wheel right does something, thumb wheel left is going to be my AoE heal, shift thumb wheel right is going to be my hot, alt thumb wheel right is going to be a spell that's on cooldown at the moment. It's a bigger heal, and that's all I can remember at the moment. And I know some other stuff is set up, like, let's see. There's a talent that's Shining Force. What's on these keys? That is my slow heal, my inexpensive slow heal. That is the hot. That is Guardian something. And there's my other big heal, right? Okay, so, right? I mean, I've got a bunch of stuff set up that I just don't remember. And it's probably because I set a bunch of stuff up in this profile in just the last few weeks, and I'm just kind of overwhelmed with the situation. So I don't know. I know I'm making excuses for myself, but this is a prime example of, one thing that I just don't remember what all these do. And that's why I think I touched on this last time in the last video. And that's why I don't have I don't even use half of these. Half of these are empty. So that's why I don't have, I don't want to close that. That's why I don't have the additional modifiers that I talked about, I think, in the last video. So, I am missing some modifiers. I can do, in addition to an Alt-Shift, I can do a Control-Alt. I can do an Alt-Shift-Control together as well. But I've just already got so many buttons that are empty that I don't, if for some reason I get even more healing spells, which is unlikely come the next expansion, maybe you're playing a game that has just like a ton of healing spells and utility spells and whatnot, then fantastic. You will use a lot of buttons for dedicated or even click healing. But I don't. It's just the way that the World of Warcraft is. Maybe one day I'll get into another game. I hope that one day I can show how to set this stuff up in other games. Because the concept is the same, but it is a little confusing sometimes when people watch this from the perspective of World of Warcraft. So in this right here, I've got my shift mouse wheel up is going to be for the dedicated healer to cast a Purify/Cleanse spell. And then alt mouse wheel up is going to be if anyone else can do like any other sort of cleanse. So in this case, if I do shift mouse wheel up, she's going to cast the cleanse on the tank. The shaman can also do this, so she'll do that. People are going to yell at me and say the mage has a D curse. You are absolutely right. The mage does have a D curse. I just don't have it set up. Okay, so if she was set up, they would both on alt mouse wheel up. They would both do that. But of course, you have to remember that you're not necessarily going to get that off right away when you're working with DPS characters. Same thing with off-spec DPS spec healing. You're in the middle of DPSing, that is probably going to take precedence over healing. And you're going to have to stop DPSing for just a second or so, which is loss in DPS, but you're going to have to stop DPSing if you want to start throwing out off heals and doing off cleanses like this. So that is my dedicated healing. And of course, I mean, if we look at, it's all virtualized to the class key map. So if we look at someone like the Shaman, Restoration Shaman is also set up to do these things. You know, there's a few spells in here, and you can just check it out. You know, just look through it. And I'm sure there's some other stuff that's set up in here. Like it's set up in disk as well, but there's nothing set in disk. Like it's all empty because I don't have disk set up. So that's why you'll see things, but they're probably everything is empty in here. So that's dedicated healing. Very simple concept, very powerful. And I am in Blackrock Caverns against my better judgment. But we're going to do some fights here, and it's going to be helpful that I've got dedicated healing because sometimes these guys do some major damage, which is also why crowd control comes in handy. So we're going to just kill this first group just like we normally would. But these guys are probably going to be doing a good bit of damage if they get to me. They get the chance to do it. Are they going to get a chance to do it? There's a little bit of see, now I can just spin my thumb wheel, and I get an AoE heal on my closest. This is kind of... There's a little too much. Okay, great. Let's get moving. So anyway, those guys did a good bit of DPS to the melee characters. And so if I run into a group of more than 2 of those guys, I don't really want to fight them that way, right? So there's a big group here. It's kind of problematic. For those of you who aren't familiar with this dungeon, there is a boss that patrols around here, so I do have to be slightly careful with what I'm doing. So anyway, let's look at... oh, there's a lot of guys over there. Okay, give me just a moment. We're going to wait for some of the patrols to walk away to make this a little simpler. So just a moment. Okay. So now we can come up. Don't get too close. Obviously, there's that separation and follow there. You don't want to get too close. But, of course, my crowd control is done with ranged characters. So here's the deal. When I mouse into the click bar, if you watch the mage, this is the mage's window down here. We have to make sure that this patrol is not coming back either. Okay. So we mouse into this. You see she picks up a target. I leave the click bar. She loses the target. Gain it, lose it. Acquire it, lose it. Acquire it, lose it. That's another one of those 2-step, on enter, on exit, mapped keys that, okay, we are just going to kill this guy because I'm tired of these patrols. You're ruining my video. So that's the deal with that. I guess I can just show that back here, right? So we don't need to be close enough. So again, acquire, clear, acquire, clear. And then this is the first click bar. This is click bar 1. They're backwards, but click bar 2 is assigned to the shaman. So the shaman has a hex spell, which is the mage can sheep, which is a polymorph spell, and the shaman can hex, which turns them into a little frog. So same thing on the shaman. The shaman is the second window down there. You can see that she's doing the exact same thing, acquiring the target, and then clearing the target. So why? First of all, we need to acquire the target to sheep it or hex it. So we need that, right? We need a way to assist from this window that we're on so that we know what to cast CC on. But I clear the target simply because what I was running into is that the assist delay, when you assist too fast sometimes, they would cast their first spell on the CC target, and that was kind of problematic. So again, this is just a system that I built now, just over time. I've never actually done anything with CC, never up until this point. I've always wanted to. I've always had ideas for focus CC, and that's something I did want to implement. I did want to implement focus CC here, but it was a little too complicated, and I was running out of time. That's a very good excuse. But right, so I just kind of set it up this way. And this is one of those systems that can be improved upon. And I'll talk about how I thought about doing the focus CC. So anyway, we can come down to the click bar here, target 1 CC, target CC number 1. And here, down at the bottom, we've got the do mouse over. Maybe I should show these first, actually. Where's our crowd control key map? So it's just 2 for 1, two map keys for 1 and 2 map keys for 2. So we're doing a mouse over. We're doing the sync. We're syncing the cursor. And we're also assisting. That's how we're getting the target. We're syncing the cursor and we're assisting. But we're syncing the cursor just to make sure it's there so that on the actual click, it'll cast. Well, you know what? Actually, the click was for focus. Anyway, let's back up. We jump in. The sync cursor is unnecessary right now, but I'll tell you why I put it there. So we assist. We mouse in, we assist the main character, whoever we're playing from, right? We assist when we mouse in, we clear target when we leave. And that's this. Run macro, clear target, just like that. Now, when we left click, we don't need to sync again. Again, that's unnecessary. But we do virtualize to all of the crowd control 1 ETG, which is just the mage. We do virtual combat. We do crowd control and virtual combat. That is virtualized to the class key maps. And we come to the mage. I passed her up. Mage Frost. We look at the crowd control thing here. And here's an example of macros that you don't need to store in ISBoxer. I'm just sending the 9 key, right? So the 9 key on the mage's action bars is polymorph. That's what it is. It's set to 9. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing the same thing on the shaman as well. So we swap to the shaman. She's got hex on the 9 key. So instead of sending the macro, which I could have done it. It would have been exactly the same result, right? I could have sent a macro that was stored in ISBoxer. Could have sent a macro that was stored in game. But I'm just sending a keybind because it all results in the exact same thing. So that's how that is done, right? That's how that is done. Now, the idea with the sync cursor is that I was going to click and I was going to set focus target. So in World of Warcraft, you can set focus and then you get an additional unit frame. And then you can use a macro to cast at focus that way. So right now, the whole reason behind the at focus casting would be because right now, if we're in a longer fight and I need to re-CC something, recast CC onto something, it's a 60-second debuff on the enemy, which is a long time. But if for some reason we need to recast it, maybe we break it and we want to recast it, right? We need to re-CC that guy. It's a little tedious to have to then click on the target and mouse back. Oh, I turned these off. And mouse back down into our click bar down here. It's a little tedious to have to do that, right? Because I want to be focused on what I'm doing with the tank and with everyone else. So this is how it's set up now. It's not great for having to re-CC, but the idea was that I would click and I would set focus. And then instead of simply sending the 9 key, we're already there. So instead of simply sending the 9 key, we would send a macro instead, which I had already set up, but I didn't use. We have one. Oh, I didn't change it. Okay, well, it should be focus. Should be focus exists. That's what it should be. Because if a focus does not exist, then it'll skip that. It'll just go to cast polymorph. So that's the idea behind that. So let's see this in action. So we're going to come down here. Again, don't get too close and aggro everyone. So we'll click. That's cast stats. We'll come here and we'll hex this guy as well. So there. Very fancy. And then we'll just pull this one guy. We'll turn our characters over here. Follow me, buddy. Keep coming. And then we just blow him up over here. Makes fighting this a lot easier. We can do the same with this guy. Hey, Mr. Patrol. See, this might be a time where you might want to re-CC because now we've got this patrol that we need to deal with. We've got about 30 seconds left on those debuffs. Oh, we've only got about 15 on that mage. On that sheep, on that mage. So we'll break that first. Here, we'll re-CC real fast. Boom. Boom. So that's how that's done, right? Not really convenient to have to mouse back into those little click bars down there. It is just the way that it is. It is just a concept, right? It's something I implemented and works, but it can use improvement. So blow this guy up then. Oh, come on, buddy. You're just going to stand there and cast? Oh, you dick. Then we'll go get you. Get him, get him, get him. And we're just going to blow this guy up. Dedicated healing going on. No need to be moving over to the click bars. We're just healing the tank. Great. The click bars really come in handy when it's time to like heal other party members. Once you've got dedicated healing locked in and ready to go, that's pretty much what I use click bars for, is to heal party members. But sometimes I'll still move over to the click bars and, oh boy. You want to get those guys? Get them. Oh, sucks to be you guys. So there, I'll use click bars. Let's hope I don't do any AoE. I think I have strict single target going on, yeah. Some of the other characters, not so much. What are you doing, buddy? And that's the CC. That's the CC. It's very cool. Again, these are concepts I did not talk about in the first 4 videos. And I didn't want to show them in the review and the demonstration because that was just about the first 4 videos. I went overboard. I started configuring spec swap menus, spec checks, menu buttons that dynamically swap, ATGs with the initialization upon export that dynamically change depending on what you've changed in ISBoxer, in addition to the crowd control click bars. But I think it's really cool. I think this worked out well simply because I'm showing how that you can expand. I mean, there's even more, even beyond, right? And here's something. I'll show this. Oh, you know what? If you're interested in making, see, this is what I was talking about. We're at the end of the video here, though. I'll just show off some cool stuff. The consecrate idea. I wanted the automatic consecrate in the DPS rotation. I wanted the manual triggered via a hotkey. And of course, we got standard consecrate, and then we had the consecrate off. So totally manual from the tanks window. And I had made the icons, right? I made the icons and I was ready to go. And I was like, you know what? This is too much work, right? I have to we're going way overboard with this. I need to just I need to turn it down from 11 down to about an 8. And we need to just get this ready to go. Here's all the spec stuff, right? I have everything in here but Demon Hunters. But these are all things that I made for myself. I'm a little selfish about these. I'm sorry. I'm selfish about them. It is the way that it is. This will hopefully motivate you. Maybe, it's not too hard to create these. It's really not. You just got to pull the files from the game and then throw it into a BLP to PNG converter, which you can probably find on WoW interface, and then you rename it and do things to them however you want them to look. But to expand upon this, I did just show this off, and maybe people are tired of me showing this off, but this is a concept that I drew up in Photoshop. I took a screenshot of my multiboxing setup. I don't know how long ago I did this, but this is a concept I had. An idea I had that I really still want to implement. But this is a configuration mode, right? We look at the spec swap menu like, wow, that's kind of hot, right? That's kind of hot. What if you had a full-on configuration menu where you could just toggle parts of your ISBoxer UI on and off at will? You can make all these changes right on the fly, And of course, the downside to it is that it does not feed back into ISBoxer. But the idea behind it is that once you've got everything configured in ISBoxer, once you have everything dialed in ISBoxer, and you're constantly, you're forced to have to go back in and change virtualization here, or you want to change video settings on the fly, you want to change which camera views are being used on the fly, you have to come into your map keys and make those changes here and whatnot. And you're constantly bouncing back and forth between ISBoxer and in-game. And the idea was that you would pull yourself completely out of ISBoxer once everything's configured for the most part, right? Once you're really comfortable with your with your profile of ISBoxer, that then you would have this in-game configuration mode. I just thought this was really cool. This is something that one day I hope to implement, but it's just a proof of concept that or just concept art, I guess, at this point, where I put this together in Photoshop. I was like, maybe one day, because this is going to be so involved to set this up. It's going to be ridiculous. I'm sure ISBoxer 2 will be out by then, by the time I even get around to attempting this. But that's it. That's it, guys. It's been a long one. It's been a long video. Yeah, that's it. It's been a long video. Thank you for watching. Again, my name is Mirai, and I will see you in the next video.